July 18th, 2008. I am Pat Reeg, and I'm interviewing Larry Blodgett about his knowledge and involvement with both the community at large and specifically the library. Um, just a few personal questions first, Larry. What are your first or best childhood memories of libraries?
Probably my first experience with the library was probably the Pleasant Hill Library before the Lafayette one, because we lived out Release Valley Road, and that was the closer library. But I do remember going as a class over to the Lafayette Library. It seemed so much bigger then, of course, than it does now. And I can't recall, but we were doing some research in there, and I can't remember anything beyond that.
How important was reading to you growing up?
Not as important as I wish it had been. My folks weren't big readers. We did read some as a child, compared to my wife's family, who they always had several books going. I wish I had started reading at a younger age, and we tried to get both our kids to do that. So it's important. I think it's very, very important.
Do you remember any particular favorite childhood books?
The Hobbit was probably one of the first books that I had a chance to read, and that was kind of fun.
The next question is where you grew up, but you've lived here in Lafayette, is that right?
Yeah, my entire life.
Your entire life, all right. What awareness of community did you have while you were growing up?
I certainly had a strong awareness for the business community, just because the family had a business in town, and associated with people that were friends of my grandparents, the Marchands, the Brzonis, some of the big developers that were in the area at the time, and then some of the small businesses, Millie's Kitchen when it was down in on Plaza Way. Dad would take me down there just about every Saturday morning for breakfast before he went to work. More on the business side certainly than the community as a whole. But that's just kind of my dad's world at the time, and I just tagged along.
Okay. What's your education, Larry?
Let's see, Spring Hill School, Ellis Highlands, which is no longer there, Stanley School, Acalanes High School, where I met my wife Karen, DVC for a couple years, and then University of Idaho, and came back and took some community college courses while I was working as an intern architect, and then came back to Lafayette to work about 16 years ago.
And somewhere you made the change from architecture to the family business.
The family business I did 16 years ago. I was working for a gentleman who had a lot of great opportunities. Did a lot of work at Blackhawk Plaza, did a lot of retail stores and so forth. Not a terribly nice individual to work for, and I thought, I could be working longer hours for less money, but at the end of the day, I know I can speak my mind. And my dad was still young enough and willing enough and able enough to kind of shepherd me along, if you will. The economy wasn't so good. That was in 91, the fall of 91. And he says, now's not a really good time, but if you're coming, you're coming. So the idea was I could still work on architecture. My father would allow me the flexibility to do side work and so forth. And it worked out pretty well. And he retired about 12 years ago.
As an adult, were there any early community experiences that you had?
Well, as an adult, I certainly have gone to our Lafayette Library as well as the Pleasant Hill Library to do research on some historical things. This is probably a few years ago, because I do rely heavily on the internet now to do it. But on occasion, I will go and seek out books that are there that you wouldn't be able to find online. I'm a huge history buff, and I've been trying to compile sort of my own little history of Lafayette and the business community and so forth, and thought about doing something with that down the road, getting photographs from the Historical Society, talking to people that have been in business a long time, Bill Ames, Ed Stokes, Tom Courtwright, some of the older business people in town. I'm not a recreational reader. About the only time I read recreationally is when I go on holiday.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have the time otherwise. I'll try and read a book at night at bedtime, and I get through about 3 lines, and then I'm out. So it's
I have
good
the
for
same
insomnia.
problem. Yeah. Do you know Mary McCosker?
Mm-hmm.
So I would think that would be a nice connection. I mean, what a great name.
Yeah,
if you
she
produce
was
that
absolutely
book.
super. I was trying to do some decorating in the store, in the showroom, and was able to get a hold of some old magazine ads, and I had them added and framed by Fast Frame in town. And then I called Mary about getting pictures of the downtown businesses, primarily through the 30s, 40s, 50s. And she was real helpful. She'd bring me a stack of pictures, and I would scan them and then get them back to her, and she'd bring me another stack, and it was a lot of fun. And I'm ultimately going to put together a CD and burn it for the Historical Society, so they can put it in their archives as a catalog. So when somebody else requests business photos, they can just hand them the disc rather than the original ones or copies they have of it.
What a great contribution. How far along are you with that
Oh, I
project?
kind of put it on hold because I've needed to spend some time on business, and then my kids are at a point in their age that they're real busy, and I want to watch what they're doing. So probably I'll pick it back up in another year or so.
If we define the goals of a community as a place of mutual support, shared values, and acceptance of differences, how do you see Lafayette meeting these goals?
We have a very, very tight community. I think it's a unique place to live, primarily because it is truly a volunteer-run city, starting from our city council on down. All the city commissions, and we've got probably 18 or 20 of them. They're all volunteers. Our city council, no one gets paid a dime. And so when you invest that volunteer time, you're invested in it. You care about what happens in the city. I think this is evident too of organizations like LASF, Friends of the Lafayette Library. When there's something that needs to get done, there's people that will roll up their sleeves and get in and do it, instead of writing a check for it necessarily, or waiting for the city to do it or somebody else to do it. They step up to the plate and get things done.
What are your earliest memories of the library here in Lafayette?
You mean the current one or the new one?
Well, the first time you were aware of
First time I was where I went with the class
Okay.
to the old library,
Okay.
and yeah, as I said, it was a field trip to the Lafayette Library. I'm sure it was when I was in grade school.
Okay. And you say you're using the library now primarily for research.
I can't, because that's just my own interest.
Uh-huh. How do you feel a library serves the community?
Well, it certainly is evolving from what a library once was, as opposed to the old depository of books. And I think where our library and learning center is going to be, will certainly serve as more or less a community center. If you want an academic learning center, if you will. And we have our community center out St. Mary's Road that serves kind of an athletic and artistic, whereas I think the new library here is certainly going to be the scholastic or educational side of it. I think it's going to be, number one, a small part is going to be the depository of books, but other than that, I think you're going to be using it for computers for people to use when they don't have one themselves or theirs is out. You've got a community meeting room where speakers can come or public hearings can be held. You've got Historical Society tied into that. You've got children's programs, and it really will bridge the gap, bridge all age groups from the folks that no longer drive and can walk there hopefully from the center of town to mothers bringing their infants and reading to them, and everybody in between. So I think it serves almost as a community center in of itself.
How have you been involved with the library over the years? Tell me about some of those experiences.
I've had no involvement with the prior libraries to this, but the current library that's being under construction now, I got involved with it through sitting on the Design Review Commission for the City of Lafayette. And that body is the group that basically reviews any commercial project or civic project, as well as any residential projects that potentially have a lot of potential issues with the community at large. So I got involved because I sat on the commission at the time. I remember interviewing some of the architects and seeing the initial stages of the submittals when they were putting it out for bid, if you will, to the architects, and seeing where it came from, a fairly humble building, and then kind of as things moved along, it became much more, and they really maxed out the site, and that became a very big challenge of materials and the way the building was oriented to have a rather large facility, not be too domineering in a business district of primarily small buildings. So it was exciting to be involved in that. It was neat to sit down and discuss materials, because there were at times they were going to build it out of certain materials that were going to be high maintenance. And we said, listen, we need to make this thing not maintenance free, but it was nice to be able to give some of my experience from the building side of things to make some recommendations. And it was nice to see some of those ideas carry through in the project.
How nice to have that background of yours in architecture, your desire to be involved with that come out in this particular project.
That's how I ended up on design review. I had really no intention, but I was getting involved with the Chamber of Commerce at the time, and Ann Denny, who was the director, said, there's a position open on design review. You need to be applying for it because you're a merchant, you're a townsperson, you've been here all your life, and you're an architect, and we need you on that committee. And it was good. I enjoyed it. I did it for about 9 years, and it was nice to be able to have a hand in how our city was evolving. Some things we made good decisions on, some things not so good, but I think it, again, is a good organization. It was a good group, again, of volunteers. And I think the library will certainly be partial proof of that. There are a lot of folks involved in it, of course. But from the aesthetic standpoint, I think Design Review really helped get it to where I think it's going to be a building we're all proud of.
Mm-hmm. You're going to feel like it's your baby, I think.
Well, yeah, and I think the big push for this whole library is the organizers of it wanted to make sure that everybody felt a sense of ownership, because you tend to want to do more for something that you can take ownership in, whether it be volunteer there or write a check or whatever. And you always tend to take care of things better when they're your own. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the organizers really were shooting for.
Speaking of writing a check, I know you were involved in the fundraising that went into the library. Tell me how that evolved and how you participated.
Yeah, I was brought in primarily because of being on the Chamber of Commerce board. We were asked to put together a subcommittee of local businesses to kind of target the local businesses on contributions. And it's been such a long time now that I can't really recall what we all did. I was a minor player in it, more of a foot soldier. But we tried to target the businesses that we felt would be good contributors to it, that had some history in town, and also identify anybody that we knew that might be residents that have kind of a low profile, who might be good contributors to it. And it's sometimes difficult to go out and ask people for money. It's always, if I have a difficult time as a salesman, I hate asking for a deposit, but it's just part of the job. And so it's difficult to do that, but most of us on the committee felt very, very passionate about it and knew it was an important thing to do.
What do you think created the change from the limited number of people named as contributors to a larger group participating?
I think it was money. I think they realized that they needed a larger number of contributors and said, listen, we need to hit every man, woman, and child that has anything to donate from a penny to $1 million+. And I know that there was a goal to try and reach every person, get a contribution from every single person in the city of Lafayette.
How successful were they at that, do you know?
My perception is I think they're not as successful as they would like to have been. I think there were some issues that came up towards the end that soured some businesses and individuals on the whole fundraising thing. And primarily it was the building got so big and so expensive because of all that we were trying to cram into it that the original estimates kept climbing up. And so instead of saying, well, we're only trying to raise X number of dollars, 6 months later, then we're going back to those same people saying, oh, by the way, now we're trying to raise this much more. And then kind of the final coup de grace, if you will, was when they had mentioned that, oh, well, we haven't figured on anything on what we're going to use to run the library, the operating expenses. And you don't tell a business person that, because when you're in business, you plan for those things. And so I think that somewhat tarnished the fundraising abilities, certainly from the business community, because there are a lot of folks that were tired of getting hit up, and then they said all of a sudden, oh, by the way, now we need to hit you up again because we now need money to operate it. And that should all have been figured in early on. Or at least it maybe was, but it wasn't divulged. So I think that's probably why they weren't as successful as they could have been.
Did you personally knock on people's doors and ask?
I made phone calls.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm not a good door-to-door solicitor. I'm not a really good phone solicitor, but I did call some people that I know. And especially when there were some fundraising events. I know the Kronks sponsored at least one that I attended, and I made some phone calls there.
Okay. Moving more now to your community involvement, Larry. I think you're going to have lots of answers to this question because I know you have just recently been Businessman of the Year. Tell me about the community events and projects and organizations that you've been involved with over the years.
Gosh, I've been back in business in Lafayette for 16 years, and basically was just trying to shadow my father while he was still involved in the business, just to kind of learn things. I didn't get too involved with the community. And then one day I get a phone call from Sarita Churchill, who was one of the managing partners for Heritage Real Estate, which their office was directly across the street from our store. And she says, hey, I know this guy, Jay Lifson, who was on my board, just got transferred to Fairfield from his job, and I have a vacancy on the board. And I'd been kind of complaining how every shopper map and everybody you talk to always said that Lafayette ended at the Lafayette Park Hotel, and there was basically nothing east of that. And so I got rather vocal about, hey, wait a second. Our business has been here for 50 plus years. There's other businesses here. Heck, our president of our chamber office was on the East End. And so I felt the East End was getting slighted. So Sarita called me and said, how about taking Jay's position? And that way you can really voice your opinion and maybe get some things done about getting the East End finally as part of Lafayette instead of that end down there by Walnut Creek. And from there, I think it was shortly thereafter was when Ann Denny said, this position on design review, you need to be involved. And about that same time, I had a number of my dad's contemporaries pester me to join the noon Rotary Club, the Lafayette Rotary Club. And I grew up with all these guys, and I kept saying no. And then the chamber did a newsletter with a story, a highlight on me, and it mentioned that I had been a member of the Lafayette Rotary Club for a couple years. So these gentlemen called me and said, well, apparently you've joined, you just haven't shown up, so I guess you better start doing that. And it's great, because I get to sit and have lunch. I get to sit and have lunch every week with people like Ed Stokes and Barry Tamajian and Tom Courtwright and Bill Ames and Steve Falk, our city manager, and Larry Desan, the Bank of the West manager, and Jay Lifson, who's now back in Lafayette. So it's fun. I mean, I remember the first couple years, I sat down with people that were, when I was a little kid, were old people. And I'm now their contemporary having lunch with them. Bill Ellis, who I went to the school that was named after him. And I had lunch with him on several occasions. Mel Nielsen, who was a former county supervisor and local businessman. He didn't die until he was well into his 90s, and the guy had more energy than most men half his age. So Rotary was between the Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce and Design Review, I kind of went from doing nothing to hyperspeed to being pretty much connected to anything that happened in Lafayette. And my kids at that time were in elementary school, and my wife kind of stayed busy with the elementary school side, and I would kind of pop in and do what I could when I could. So she kind of took care of the school stuff, and I took care of the community stuff. But projects I've been involved with, gosh, our Rotary Club does the Concert of the Res annually. Chamber of Commerce, we have our Art and Wine Festival every September. The Restaurant Walk in the spring. Rotary, we've done a number of service projects. Nothing a whole lot of lately. Unfortunately, our group is older gentlemen, and we don't have a lot of young folks that have time to build play structures or things like that. Probably have had the biggest hand in new construction projects in our downtown through design review. My first meeting was with the town center, the row of shops where Hollywood Video and so forth was. Very controversial. I made several comments the first night that I was critical of the design. I said, I don't think this is the right one. And I was told to be quiet, that they'd been beating that dead horse, and the council was on their case to get it passed. So it got approved, and then everybody complained about what it looked like. That I was involved in the Lafayette Veterans Memorial Building. I'm very proud of how that turned out. The veterans have become very good friends of mine. Involved with the Lafayette newly opened Lafayette Mercantile, Lafayette Square, Cortese's properties. Involved in obviously the library construction. Involved with I wasn't involved with Oakwood. That happened before I came along. But a lot of the bigger projects in town I've been involved with, and it's nice to be able to say something and have an effect on something, and bring some history, some expertise, and I tried to bring a voice of reason as a design review commissioner, because you can't just say you're going to do it my way. You have to be reasonable. You have to negotiate and say, this is why we want certain things the way we want them, and you don't win everything, but you hopefully educate the developer or the builder as to why they should make these changes, why it's a benefit to them and the community at large.
Are you still on the design?
No, I stepped down a bit. It'll be 2 years this October.
Okay.
It took a lot of time. It was very stressful. I couldn't go anywhere in town without being pulled aside and lobbied or yelled at or monopolized, or people would bring their plans in my place. What was the biggest thing was when they would come to my place of business, and they would take my time away from my business to answer their questions. And they would all say, "Oh well, you've done a great job. When we get there, we're definitely bringing our business to you." And that's not why I did it. But what annoyed me is, don't tell me you're going to do something and then not do it. Don't be disingenuous. I didn't answer their questions or help them or counsel them because I thought I did anything from it. I wanted them to get a good project passed, and I wanted them to be able to think more positively on the city. But don't take my time from my business or my family. Tell me you're going to reward me by bringing business to me and then not showing up. Just don't tell me that.
Sure. Yeah.
Pick my brain.
Gets to be old.
Take advantage of me, but don't tell me something that you're going to do and then not do it.
As far as the library, who have you observed making a real impact? Any particular personalities that have stood out, and why?
Well, Bob Fisher's a personality in himself. I mean, he's past council member, past mayor of the city. I don't really know the man very well. He certainly comes out. Kathy Merchant certainly is always in the forefront. She's always there. The folks with the Historical Society, Marshall Duncan is certainly a very familiar fixture with the school. Well, Cameron, Heather, and I all went to school together. But Marshall is always there. I wouldn't say that there's any one particular personality that stands out in my mind, which I think is a good indication that it's truly a community involvement. A lot of folks are involved in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people got their finger in the pie, and it's difficult to get things to gel. And I think for the most part they've done a pretty good job at it. but I guess the proof will be in the pudding when I get the building done.
What are the best memories of your involvement with the new library? Is there anything that was particularly fun or rewarding?
Again, rewarding part, I wouldn't say it's fun, but rewarding was being involved in the design review process. Working with the architect, working on a subcommittee to kind of tweak the design, if you will. As far as the aesthetics and building materials, I enjoyed that part of it. I enjoyed pointing out, I shouldn't say enjoyed, but it was rewarding to be able to see what I felt was a design flaw, bring it to the attention of the committee and to the architect, and then at the very next meeting see them actually make a change to it. It was nice to be able to felt rewarding to see something others did not and point something out that they ultimately agreed with me on, that they dismissed.
What values did this contribution touch that are dear to you?
Well, I think probably a lasting design. I mean, if that's a value, we certainly don't want to put something in that is antiquated in its appearance and its use. In a matter of a couple decades. I think the design is flexible enough that it can evolve. Certainly won't be able to expand, and that's the only sad thing about it. But there's a lot of rooms in this thing that those things may change. I think what is probably the best thing is its location. I think being in the center of town, I think is good. I mean, I'm thrilled with it because I live 2 blocks away, so I know that when I'm old and can't drive anymore,
You can walk.
if I can manage the hill down First Street,
Yeah.
I can walk back and forth, and I look forward to that.
Have you seen any transformation in Lafayette because of the new library?
Not yet, but it'll happen. Certainly
Right.
with the Boswell's property, I think that one and the Taco Bell property across the street will see be the first things to probably potentially change.
In what way would you suspect?
Well, I mean, you have now a large civic building that's much larger than any building around it. I know that there was discussions about somehow down the road, and the city's not in a position to do it now, but take over the old Boswell's property, which was the Don Young Ford property, and develop that property into a civic center where the city offices would be. And the city has money in a fund, but not nearly enough to purchase it or develop it. But I know that's been a vision of many people in that area. There's been discussions about what's going to occur to the Taco Bell property. In of itself, it's too small to do anything with, but if it were to be purchased by a developer in combination with the adjacent properties, I could fully see that being developed into something more. But the new library will certainly serve as a catalyst or a spring point for surrounding properties to evolve as well.
Why do you think that the citizens of Lafayette have responded so enthusiastically to the new library project?
Well, education is important in this community. We're fairly highly educated group of people. We find an importance in learning. They like things new and shiny. At least the younger people do. And the old library is kind of dark and dank and water stained and all the rest of it. It's on a very busy street, and there's no easy way to get there. Not to say that Mount Diablo is not a busy street, but at least you have the access from First Street, and you've got Golden Gate Way. Again, it's more centrally located, and I think probably more pedestrian friendly.
What outcome do you hope most for the new library, and what do you look forward to using and doing and enjoying the most?
I hope it is successful. I hope it's as successful as the folks involved in it hope it will be. I hope that the money is there to keep it open, to maintain it. It would be unfortunate if they're only able to be open 10 hours a week or some ridiculously low area. It will be. I look forward to primarily going there and listening to speakers. If there's a community event, being able to walk to there as opposed to get in my car and drive out to the community center.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to make myself walk more than drive. just because it's been so difficult to get around with our
Right.
street work that's been happening, plus the cost of gas.
Yeah.
Plus, it's good exercise too. But I hope that it's as successful as the folks that are involved in it. I have my doubts. I hate to be negative, but in this economy, it'll be interesting to see where it ends up being. But I look forward just to having a place to be able to go, listen to speakers. I'm hoping that the outdoor plaza areas are nice spaces just to kind of hang out, meet a friend for coffee, maybe pop in and do some research on a project I may be on.
You've heard and I've heard that the people saying that the internet would kill the printed word and libraries would become obsolete. How do you think that this new library is going to avoid that fate?
Well, I think that the folks that took it from its humble beginnings as being a book depository, I think realized that. We may have stop with that door closed 1 second. Realized that early on, and that's why it went from the Lafayette Library to Lafayette, Library and Learning Center, because it was going to serve more than just a place to go look at books. It was going to serve as a place for story time for kids. It was going to serve as a home for the Lafayette Historical Society. It was going to be a used bookshop with the Friends of Lafayette Library, a little cafe, the community room, which will be able to handle speakers from the Commonwealth Club and serve for hopefully city commission meetings. So they realize that you can't have just one facility serving one need. It's going to have, in order for it to succeed, it's going to have a much broader scope to it to attract more people. Otherwise, it is just a building where only old people are going to go because they don't have a computer.
Is there anyone else that you think would be really important for us to interview?
Well, there's some folks that I don't know what information they'll give you, but from a historical standpoint, Bill Ames is probably a good person to talk to. Certainly has some long-time history in town. It's downtown, and can probably tell you at least the 62 fundraising for whatever the initial library. Too bad Bill Ellis isn't around anymore, because he'd been a great source when past superintendent of Lafayette School District. Ed Stokes might have some history on it.
He's been interviewed.
He has. Tom Courtwright of Orchard Nursery might be an individual to talk to. Another person in town that may or may not would be Bob Underwood. He used to be one of the local veterinarians in town. I think who else? Ruth Dyer. I'm sure you probably talked to Ruth. She's my history teacher in high school. Who else? Nancy Flood, possibly.
Did she instill, Ruth Dyer, instill that interest in
history? No, probably not. I think I probably always had it, but I always got along well with Ruth. Yeah, neat lady. I really enjoyed her. Nancy Flood. I don't know if she's been contacted or not. She taught over at Spring Hill for years, and she's retired and very involved with the Flood family. Was in Lafayette a long time, and of course an educator. Do you think of anybody, honey, that would? Yeah. Sorry.
Well, Larry, what have I left out? And do you have any final thoughts at all?
Gosh, I think I probably said way too much.
Not at all. Not at all.
I have to say, I enjoy where we live because it's centrally located. I don't like the freeway noise, but waterfalls help compensate for that. It's neat to have my kids grow up in a community that is volunteer run. I've not enjoyed some of the growing pains. It's not the town I grew up in. Some of that's positive, some of it's not so positive. I'm hoping that we can congeal this town. We're in some growing pains right now. We've had some large projects come in. A lot of people are not happy with them. There seems to be a battle between where people want to see the city go. Some people want to keep it exactly as it was. Others want to turn it into Berkeley. I'm somewhere in between. I know you got to move on, but I don't want to be Berkeley. If I wanted to be Berkeley, I would have lived in Berkeley. And it seems like we're turning into more of a mini Berkeley.
In what sense?
Well, a number of folks with a sense of entitlement. We find a lot of children in our school district have this sense of entitlement that, well, I should have it because I should have it, not because they should earn it. So I'm concerned that the volunteerism is going to fade. And I think that's, again, what I think makes Lafayette special. And maybe that's not a fair assessment. This is my own personal view of how I see, and I shouldn't pick on Berkeley, but and maybe it's just the sign of the times, that, again, the sense of entitlement. There's a lot of folks that have waited to have children older. The kids that they have tend to have more freedoms. Their parents were children of the 60s and the free speech and free spirit movement, and they kind of let their kids be their own guide. And kids can't be their own guide. They need to have somebody guide them and tell them to make the right choice. Allow them to make mistakes, but help guide them to make right choices. And I don't see as much of that as I did with what I do with my kids.
Right.
My wife and I are the young ones for this community with kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 45 and she's 43, and my oldest is 17 and my youngest is 13.
Yeah.
And most of my friends in my age all have, their oldest is 10 and go down to newborns.
Uh-huh.
So that's just how it worked out for my wife and I. But Lafayette's a great community. I still feel very strongly about it. It's got a great business district. Our Chamber of Commerce is probably one of the powerhouses of Contra Costa County as far as its how unified it is. Our townspeople are extremely loyal to the local businesses. Our city council listens to the chamber. If the chamber has something to say, they want to know about it. And if we go to a city council meeting and don't say something, and we're in the audience, they'll say, well, you're here, you must have something to say. So it's nice to be listened to from that standpoint.
Yeah, there is participation.
There is, and again, it's as I said earlier, it's a volunteer-run city, and you can make a difference. It takes a while, but if you are there and you have constructive criticism and offer solutions, I think you can make a difference. It's not by way in other cities.
You've been a shining example of volunteerism, and
to a fault.
I think we all thank you for that, Larry,
Well,
and
thank
thank you
you,
for
Pat.
this interview.
Thank you.